Well, hello and welcome to the Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar, helping you cultivate a life you love. Well, I certainly hope that you're having a phenomenal day. And how are your thoughts today? I hope you kind of check in throughout your day because it is incredible to see sometimes how our thoughts can hijack our day and really take us in directions that we don't want to go. Well, we're going to get some help today with our expert. He is an author, several times author actually, Thomas Sterner. He's written a book called The Practicing Mind, Fully Engaged. And his most recent book that we're going to delve into today is called It's Just a Thought: Emotional Freedom Through Deliberate Thinking. And it's amazing how we can harness the power of our thinking to create a life that truly does feel magnificent and easy. And, we can get rid of sort of the victimhood and the resistance. So let's talk about how to create a masterful life with Thomas Sterner. Tom, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Mindset Mentor today. I cannot wait to talk about your latest book.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So I think a lot of people, have this set belief system that dictates their entire life. And so I'd love to talk about, your book and how we can start to unravel some of those habitual ways of thinking. But first, I just want to talk about, what inspired you to create this book? What is it that you've seen, in your world that you said, okay, we need some help with our thinking?
Well, I think the one of the things is that we know now that our thoughts are they're not our own, that they go outside of us, that they impact the world around us. A thought is basically electromagnetic energy encoded with information, and that information goes outside of us, and we are in a conversation with other people through our hearts. That's why I wrote in part in the book, there's a chapter on heart math. But, growing up, I was told that, and I think most of us were taught that you can't control your emotions. They're just your emotions and you can't control them. And actually, we now know that that's about the farthest from the truth that it could
Mm-hmm.
be, that our emotions are the content of the thoughts that are fired off by our subconscious mind. And when we get outside of that loop, in other words, the language of the subconscious mind is feelings. It doesn't really pay much attention to the words. It looks at the feelings and correlates that to what is happening around us when we have those feelings. And then it basically installs that as the reaction that we should have when that particular scenario shows up. And all of this is happening completely invisible to us, the recording of this. And and then we either are a victim of it, or we are using it to create what we want. And for most people, according to neuroscience, we spend about 95% of our day living programs that we have installed. And it's important for people to understand that the system is recording and it doesn't care whether you know it's recording. I mean, it's what it does. And whether you're aware of it or not, it's still happening. So once you become aware of it, then I would say that's like the key to the prison door, because now you have the privilege of choice. Doesn't mean it's always easy, because what we've installed into our subconscious, we have repeated thousands and thousands of times. So it has a lot of inertia, it has a lot of momentum when a situation happens and we get a response that makes us feel differently than we would like to feel. So when we try to change that, there is going to be some pushback, but that's okay. I mean, like we still have the ability to control how we react to situations and what emotions we experience. And so that's really, as this has become so much more advanced in the last 10 years, that I originally wrote The Practicing Mind, which was about learning to be in the present moment and to be fully engaged, which was the second book, but no pun intended, but to be fully engaged in this moment and what you're doing, and not to become attached to your goals, but to use them as a rudder. And then that carried me into the research on this. And I think that we're really at a point where we have to all understand the impact of our thinking, worldwide. And so it's important that we start to take responsibility for that.
I really love that you said that because I think that, we do need to take responsibility for our thinking collectively, how we impact each other throughout our days. And now we all know what it feels like to have intense emotion through our thought pattern, through the subconscious mind, and which obviously dictates our behavior and how we interact with other people. And we see that time and time again, whether it's through our own experience or witnessing it, through the triggers that people have. The explosive sometimes reaction to something that, wouldn't normally, let's say, elicit that response. But it's what's underneath. It's the patterns. It's what's inside, hiding in the subconscious mind. So it's really interesting that you say all that. So I'd love to talk about how someone can become aware of their dictating beliefs and what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak, because I think we all would love to be able to, have that, deliberate thinking that take us to the direction that we want versus being stuck in a victimhood mentality. But how do we start? What is the first point that you would suggest that gives us the impetus to move forward in an empowering way?
Well, it's really quite simple, and there is no other way. And that is that you have to have some sort of a very small, I call it thought awareness training. You could call it meditation. That's just a label. But what we're not interested in for this purpose, we're not looking for some sort of a transformational spiritual experience. What we're looking for is an awareness of what thoughts our mind is producing without our permission. And most people are not aware of that. Their mind thinks and they're in the thought. They're not the observer of the thought. They're two very different places. And in order to change the programming, you have to get outside of the programming. The programming is, it's like you can't, if you're in the behavior and you're not watching the behavior, well, that isn't going to work. So you have to get outside of the behavior. And so, what I tell people is, look, we're only looking for 10 minutes a day. And if you can't find 10 minutes a day to change your life, then you need to check your schedule because, you're worth it and, and it's your responsibility. So, 10 minutes a day is, where we sit in a chair, upright, close our eyes. What I give my clients is a recording of ocean waves just to kind of help them block out the external world. And then I tell them, I just want to give you a single task for your mind. And the reason for that is so that you have a point of relativity. Like, you know what you're telling the mind to do. And that would be like, I want you to watch my body breathe, or it could be, I want you to just hear a simple 3-word phrase. And what will happen is when you do that, you sit down, you close your eyes, you take a few slow breaths, and then you just instruct the mind to do that. And that's it. That's the mechanics to it. It's very simple. What will happen and where people really mistake what they're trying to do here is the mind is a problem-solving machine, and it gets bored very quickly, especially with such a simple task. So then it will take off. And it doesn't take it very long. It could be 10 seconds into it. And when it takes off, you'll go with it because that's what you've done your whole life. And then there's a point, and it's the magical point, where you wake up and you realize that you have run off with your mind to the grocery store or wherever it is that you've gone. And that is the moment when you basically you move yourself into the observer. You anchor yourself into the observer of what because you have to be observing what the mind is doing to have that perspective. And when you do that, you become the noticer of the thoughts instead of being in the thought. And that is huge. It's really huge. It sounds simple and it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a very huge moment. And then you use your willpower to pull the mind back to the task that you have given it. And that strengthens your willpower. So where people fall down is they feel like they can't make their mind stop thinking, well, I don't care about that. Like your mind's going to think that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to notice what the mind is doing that we are not asking it to do. And so some days your mind is very ramped up and agitated and it's going to be running off a lot. And other times it's going to be rather placid and it's not going to resist you very much. And it'll be fairly still. And that's just all part of it. And I've been meditating all kinds of meditations for 45 years, and that has not changed. Like,
Mm.
this is just the act of going through this. Now, I did have a thing one time with high schoolers who have highly agitated minds, especially with all the social media and the smartphones. And I said, look, I'm gonna set a timer. I want you to close your eyes for 2 minutes and stop thinking. Now, I knew that they couldn't do that, but they
Mm-hmm.
didn't know. They didn't have a clue. And so when they went into this task, it was a total epiphany for them. In 2 minutes, when they opened their eyes, they were just, chatting, and that, like, I couldn't do it. And they were so surprised that they didn't have this ability. And I said, well, here's something for you to think about. If you are um, using your will, you are using your will, and you're telling your mind to stop thinking, and your mind is saying, no, I'm going to think anyway. Who's really in charge during the day? Because it's not you. And you never really have freedom if you aren't in charge. You're not deliberate thinking. You're not making thoughts deliberately. You're just basically experiencing thoughts. Thoughts are happening to you and you're reacting to them. So that is really the only way to start this. And I start every client that I have with this is the fundamental building block. Everything comes from that afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely love that. And it's really interesting because, it's a great example. I think a lot of people can relate to that because as soon as they say, oh, I'm going to try to meditate, quiet the mind, everybody always says, I'm doing it wrong. And there is no right or wrong. Again, it's setting that intention and kind of understanding. And again, becoming that observer. When you can become that observer in your life, that is a game changer. And I would love to hear some examples, Thomas, if you can share with us personally, because I'm thinking about my own life and when I became the observer and my thoughts became hyper focused on my thinking. I couldn't believe what was going on in my mind and the thoughts that I had. They were ridiculous. And you spoke a little bit earlier about how those thoughts are not your own. And of course, we inherit, thoughts and limiting beliefs and patterns and behaviors from our ancestors. So I'd love to hear, Tom, if you have some examples to share with us of some of the things that you have encountered with your clients.
Yeah, I've had, I mean, an example that I gave, one time, just because it's amusing,
Mm-hmm.
is that I was working with a CEO that did not believe in any of this modality. I mean, he was certain that he was in control of his thinking all the time, that
Mm-hmm.
he intentionally made his thoughts and that he was a deliberate thinker. And when he finished saying that to me, I said, did I tell you to talk? You need to sit there and shut up until I tell you to talk. And as soon as I did that, he was no longer in control of his thinking. I mean, he became offended and defensive. And then he realized what had happened, and I said, you see, you didn't make a decision to feel that way. You didn't make a decision to have that reaction. I said, the reaction happened to you. And then you were caught up in the emotional content. I said, really, if I'd asked you, how would you like to handle that situation? You probably would say, I'm not going to surrender my inner peace to this guy. I don't care what he says to me. But you never had that choice because you were a victim of your own programming and a prisoner of it. So that's an example there. Now, there's also situations like, to use a larger one would be like Captain Sully landing the Airbus on the Hudson. There's a situation where it's a panic situation. There's a lot of fear involved in the situation. And yet he was able to deliberately think of what he should do in that situation, which saved all of those lives. I can tell you as a pilot, we're taught you don't wait for the engine to quit and then pull out the pilot's operating handbook and leaf through it to see what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
You already know what you're going to do, which is a very important thing because you make the decisions of how you're going to react to these triggers before they happen. So you have something to cling to. But again, that if you, there's another situation where if somebody comes into the room and they say, what the heck's wrong with your hair today? Then, like are you going to surrender your freedom your peace of mind, your freedom, your self confidence. Are you going to surrender that to this person, or are they going to be in control of you? And
Mm-hmm.
this is the kind of thing that what we're really talking about here is personal freedom, is the ability to feel what you are the gatekeeper of the thoughts. And you make the decisions as to what thoughts you're going to let through and what thoughts you're not going to let through. Which thoughts will be productive for you. Well, they're always productive. They just don't always produce what you want. But you're going to be the one who is going to make the decision that this thought passes through. I like this thought. This is going to work for me. This thought is only going to make me upset and angry. And that's not going to serve my happiness or the situation.
Yeah, I love that because if we look at so many instances, whether again it could be our friends, our own family, our personal experience, there's relationships that are destroyed or can be destroyed through those thoughts that we cling on to, that we decide that this is truth, this is what we focus on. So we're using our thoughts in a different, deliberate way. But if we can actually sort of now redirect, course correct some of the negative thinking that we have and the limiting beliefs, it's incredible to see how we can repair some of those relationships, or not necessarily even repair them, but now foster new relationships that actually serve us, because we certainly teach people how to treat us. And oftentimes it's that negative thinking and our patterns and those thought processes that keep us stuck to what does not serve us. So, I'd love to talk about, what we can do to sort of cut the cords, in those situations. But we're going to take a break here on the Sauga 960. You're listening to The Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar. My special guest today is author Thomas Sterner. Thomas has written a book called The Practicing Mind, a second book called Fully Engaged, and his latest book, which we are delving into today, which is It's Just a Thought. And what it is, the subtitle is Emotional Freedom Through Deliberate Thinking. And deliberate thinking is so key here. It's fascinating to see how that can change and transform your day-to-day living and help you to cultivate your best life. So stay tuned, and we'll be back right here on Sauga 960. Welcome back to the Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar. I hope that you are having a phenomenal day. We're having a great conversation with author Thomas Sterner. Thomas has written a book, his latest book, called It's Just a Thought, and it's emotional freedom through deliberate thinking. So we're really going to focus on how to, deliberately think, a positive life into being. Tom, it's so great to have you here, and I would love to talk about the connection between the heart and mind, because I think when you have that type of cohesion, life really starts to flow. We have a lot of resistance in life through our thinking and our limiting patterns and the beliefs and the programming, that happens through all of that. So how do we sort of balance that heart and mind to create a easier flow?
Well, I think it's fair to mention the Heart Math Institute with this, and they're 3.5 decades into their research, and so this is peer-reviewed, science-backed. It's not hocus pocus. I think that one of the most fascinating parts of this for me is that I'm not quite sure of the exact date, but I'm guessing it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the neurocardiologist discovered that your heart has its own brain. In fact, they call it the heart brain, and that it has its own nervous system, memory, and that there is a conversation that goes on between the heart and the brain, and that really what the brain does is a lot of regulating your blood pressure, regulating hormone release, and those sort of things. But it's dependent on the heart brain to tell it what to do and when to do it. So when you look at the traffic, the communication traffic between the two, you find that the heart is doing certainly most of the talking, probably 75 to 80% of the conversation is being dictated by the heart. And it's really hard to kind of grasp for that because we've been raised to feel like, well, the heart is just this muscle that pumps blood. How can it be
Mm,
thinking?
mm,
But the heart is really doing. I would look at it as the heart. This is my own personal beliefs based on what I've read. The heart is the seat of the consciousness. The brain is a computer. Like you're not your laptop, you use your laptop, so the heart uses the brain because it's linked into all of the nervous system and everything like that. So it gives it instructions. But the seat of consciousness, where you really live, is more in the heart. And the interesting thing about the heart is that the information that the heart puts out this information. And I mentioned earlier that thoughts are electromagnetic energy that are encoded with information.
mm,
So one of the ways that you can look at that they give as an example is a smartphone. A smartphone puts out an electromagnetic wave, and that wave carries data. It carries the conversation you're having, the pictures you're sending, the texting. It carries that information in that wave, and the heart works in the same way. It has information about you, your concept of yourself, how you feel about the person you're with, how you feel about the situation that you're in. So it's very tied into the subconscious, and and that information goes outside of your body, and our neurosystem is designed to receive that information from somebody else's heart. So there is actually a very active communication that is going on between two people or more, if there's a bunch of people in the room. Now, they have said, initially, they said that this electromagnetic field that goes outside of the heart is measurable. I think they said it's measurable up to 3 feet, but that just means
mm,
it's measurable because that's a limitation of the technology. Doesn't mean that it doesn't go farther. So, but what really stuck out at me was the disconnect there, the miscommunication. In other words, the heart only speaks the truth. It's dealing with the real facts, how you really feel about yourself. You can tell somebody, oh, yeah, I got tons of confidence, but you don't necessarily have tons of confidence. You're just saying that.
mm,
So the mouth can say whatever it wants, but the heart only speaks the truth. That's the reason why we have all these sayings, look to your heart, follow your heart, all these things that have been around for a long time. So I just find it interesting that you can be having a conversation with someone and there is a disconnect between what you feel and what they're saying. And that's where that's coming from, because these two don't have to be synchronized. When they are synchronized, and this is what coherence is when the two of them come in to coherence with each other. And what that looks like is, if I'm understanding the technology, is
mm,
if you look at if let's just say your heart's beating 80 beats per minute. Well, most people think that's like a metronome, where it's like bump, bump, everything's even. Like, it's beating on eighth notes, Well, actually, no, like your heart it may beat like 3 beats that are close to each other, and then there's a gap, and then it starts to beat. It just totals 80 beats per minute. So it's
mm,
not an even beat. When the two are in coherence, that beat is very even. And that's one of the things that their technology measures, when you're using their like inner balance software, is it's looking at how that relationship of the heart. And when you're in coherence, that's very even. And then the brain and the heart link up, and then everything in the body becomes synced. Your nervous system, and the impact on you and what you're experiencing is your decision making. You have clarity, your stress goes down considerably. You have access to cognitive abilities that you don't normally have. I mean, there's so
mm,
many things that happen with this, and it's just very simple. It's to attain this, I mean, their coherence system is basically where you sit, and this is, I mean, I'm doing this very quickly, but you would sit and you would you would center your thoughts in your heart, in that nerve center there. And you would think heartfelt thoughts, gratitude. You might think about someone that you love dearly and you're so appreciative of them in your life, or just all the abundance that you have, all those types of things. You think of them, and the heart and the brain go into coherence, when you do that. So it's a very simple act of doing this. And again, as we talked about earlier, this energy that goes out of you then is coherent.
mm,
And you can actually, they have done experiments where they have 3 practitioners that are very good at being in coherence, and they send somebody in the room that doesn't know anything about heart math, but they have a monitor on them, and their heart will go and brain will go into coherence simply by being in the presence of these other people that are practicing coherence. So
Oh,
this is why what we think, what we feel, what we're programming, because what we program into the subconscious is going to be how we react to circumstances. So if we put programs into our subconscious that is going to make us go into coherence in situations, then imagine if everybody's doing that.
yeah.
Like the impact on global consciousness and everything. It's just such a fascinating thing, and they're they're working on this. They're training people all over the world, to put time into this, but also in companies. Like the company is the team in coherence. Like it's not our families in coherence. I mean, there's all this there's all this to be gained by this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, even just having this conversation, I feel like, we're, in coherence and spreading that out there. And it's amazing because we can walk into a room and feel the energy. We know when there is no coherence, or we're going to pick up some negative energy from people. And it's interesting that science, has now, sort of caught up with that and been able to prove that magnetic field exists, because a lot of people, haven't really understood the connection. So it's fascinating to see all the research that is, coming to play, and the importance of, fostering that coherence, and certainly, having deliberate thoughts, focusing into the direction that you want to go and moving towards that, and retracting from some of the things that don't serve you. Loving that conversation, and it's interesting because if we think about the heart, the emotion, the feeling, the what the heart contains. If we look at some of the situations where people have had a transplant, all of a sudden they start to like the same foods that
Yeah.
somebody, right,
Yeah.
enjoyed. And so it shows you that there is a brain there. There is something
There's a
there.
memory there. There
Mm-hmm.
is a memory there. Yeah, I think that this is just such a game changer because you know the 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 downside of empirical Western science is it's always limited by its technology.
Mm-hmm.
So its truths can't exceed its technology. Whereas if you look in the Eastern traditions, we're the ones that called them mystics. They didn't call themselves mystic. We came up with that name. To them, they were scientists. They were just not oriented towards external technology. They just used what they had, which was their consciousness to look inwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been saying this stuff for thousands of years. And now, when you just mentioned that our technology is catching up with it, and an easy way to look at it is, you couldn't say there was bacteria until you had a microscope to see it under to see it on a slide, and so this stuff now, if you were to talk about this 30, 40 years ago, people would just think it was foo nonsense, but
Mm-hmm.
now when you can actually see it on the screen, you can see the electromagnetic field coming out of the heart. You can see all this stuff. Then now we're really comfortable investing in it personally because we don't feel like somebody is going to make fun of us or question us because,
Yeah.
well, of course, well, why wouldn't I believe in it? Like it's right there, so that is kind of, I think, is the downside, but in this instance, it's really serving us because we can feel very confident that this is the truth. This is not something that's being made up that can't be proved.
Yeah, I love it. And, I think it's just the proof is in also the feeling, right? I mean, that is proof right there in and of itself. We're going to continue the conversation here on Saga 960. You're listening to The Mindset Mentor. We will be back with more Thomas Sterner. Thomas is a multiple author. He has written a book called The Practicing Mind, Fully Engaged, and his latest book that is fascinating, which is called It's Just a Thought. So come back and we're going to help you create some deliberate thoughts. Welcome back to the Mindset Mentor. I always talk about how your mindset is like a muscle that needs to be strengthened and conditioned. And this is your mindset workout. We're going to help you really focus your thoughts, create deliberate thoughts. So, creating the life that you love. Yes, it is within your power. You can harness the power of that magnetic field and have heart and mind coherence that we just touched on before we took a break. We're going to continue the conversation with my special guest today, Thomas Sterner. Thomas, It is such a pleasure having you on the Mindset Mentor. I love this conversation. I love the work that you're doing. I think it is invaluable. And especially in the time that we are at collectively, globally. And, we really need to start becoming deliberate creators of our thoughts. We see that, war is happening. There's, racial prejudice, all kinds of things that really we can take that back to thoughts. The thoughts create our reality. So it's so important to have that deliberate way of thinking. I'd love to talk about some of the work that you're doing with your institute as well, the Practicing Mind Institute, which you're the CEO of. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I would say what we focus on is really goes back to what you were just talking about. There's a lot of tension, in the world, and I think one of the most important things, what I tell people is, you're not your thoughts.
Mm,
I am not my thoughts. I have thoughts. Some thoughts I create, but most of my thoughts happen to me, and you can't control thoughts if you're in the thoughts. So one of the things I tell people, look, during the day, I want you to ask yourself, am I thinking or am I being thought? And because that is a good touchstone, to just recenter you, to ask yourself, am I thinking, am I deliberately creating this thought? Am I deliberately creating this reaction? And if you are, then you should be able to stop it if you don't want to. And most of the time, because I've asked people, look, ask yourself during the day when you're feeling anxious or angry or whatever, if you could stop this thought, would you do it?
mm,
And they always say, yeah. And I say, that's because the thought is not you, it's happening to you, and you're not in control of it. So I think what we've really become clear about is that we are not our thoughts, and we have to take more interest into what thoughts, how we create our thoughts and who we really are, and what power that gives us. Because once you step out of the prison, when you experience, and we talked about this early on with the thought awareness training, when you experience that I can watch what my mind is doing instead of being in what my mind is doing, when you can change that perspective, all of a sudden everything opens up, because now you have the privilege of choice. Now, it doesn't mean that it's easy, because the thought systems that you have installed have a lot of inertia. As I said earlier, you have reinforced them over and over and over again. So when you go to change them, when you make the decision that this is not serving me, there's going to be pushback. And so you need to expect that, here it is. I expected it, because and from the subconscious mind's
mm-hmm,
perspective, it's like, hey, you told us this is what you wanted us to do when this happens. And now you're telling us you don't want this to do. Like, you told us this 10,000 times, and now all of a sudden you've changed your mind. I mean, so from its perspective, it's really trying to hang on to what it thinks. It always takes what you hand it as the truth. So it's trying to hang on to that. Now, when you have trained it to react in a way that you want it to react, that serves you, because it's not easily shaken. It's got your back. It's right there. It's very steadfast. But when you're trying to change it, now that's working against you. But you have to realize that you're neither one of those. You're outside of that. Your consciousness, the real you, is outside of that. So you're just looking at the system and the way the system works, and you're understanding that. And so, you have to work within those parameters. So that's really what we do, is to get people, first of all, to look at it. And I always start with, say, one situation, like, let's just learn the mechanics,
mm-hmm,
and I will ask them, they'll say, well, when this happens, I always do this and I don't want to. And so I'll say, okay, well, what do you want to do when that happens? And there's dead silence. Did you ever think about what do you want to do when that happens? No. I
ah,
said, well, if you don't know what you want to do, how are you going to do it? Like, you have to know what you want, and you have to figure that out when you're outside of the emotional content that is coming from those thoughts, because that's the only time when you have clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So make your decision, sit down, write it down, actually write it down. Like when this particular instance that repeats in my life happens, this is what I want to do in that moment. And then what we begin to do is we begin to come up with a procedure to basically bolster their power in the situation for pushing back. Something they can cling to, so that they're not overwhelmed. And also to understand that there is, like the meditation, you have to be in the situation in order to practice overcoming the situation. So, this is something that, people should look at. Many times when they have a situation that they feel like they're struggling in, all the struggle is telling, that feeling of struggle, all
Mm-hmm.
that's telling them is that they're not real good at this situation. It's just data. It isn't, the data doesn't know that it's making you feel bad about yourself. It's just giving you information and telling you you're right up against your skill threshold. This is where you are. You haven't gone past it. So now I'm letting you know you can go past that, because that's where you're at, is right up against the wall. Like, so you can push past that. And if you look at it like that, your interpretation of that stops being, I'm weak, I'm a terrible person. No, like, people never look at the wake behind the boat. Like, I mean, they always judge their position based on how they're reacting in this moment. Like, and I see this. I mean, I just had a conversation with the CEO this morning, and he said, he goes, if I look at how I would, he's under a lot of stress right now. He said, if I look at how I would have handled this situation 2 years ago, he said, before I started working with you, he goes, it's like life and day. He said, like, I don't get rattled. He said, I have clarity. He said, I make good decisions. He said, so he goes, I make sure that, because we talk about this, look behind the boat, because, many times I remember from years of sailing, when you were sailing into the wind, you always had all this wind in your face because you were sailing against the wind. But when you would turn around and sail with the wind, you were going as fast as the wind. So you didn't have any wind in your face. And it felt like you were sitting still until you looked out on the back of the boat and you saw this wake, flying away. And you realized how fast you were actually moving and how far you had come. So I think that that's a really important thing for people. When you undertake this, you take it as, look, like a musician on the very first day of their lessons, and let's say they're learning the piano, they don't know where the notes are on the keyboard. They don't know where they are when they look at it on the staff. They don't know what value they are, the time signature, all that. So they don't know any of that. That's their threshold. That's where they are. And so now we jump ahead 3 years, and they're trying to play a Mozart piece. How do they feel inside? What is the feeling in their heart? The feeling is, this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because they're up against their threshold. So it can feel like, I haven't gone anywhere. I've been doing this for 3 years and it's still hard. No, you're here. You don't have to wonder where the notes are on the page, and you're not trying to figure out what finger pushes what key. That's all way behind you. You've already mastered all that. You're always
Oh.
going to be up against the threshold of your skill. That's where you're going to be. And that, when you recognize that, you stop feeling like you haven't accomplished anything just because you're feeling a certain, like, struggle is a label. That's all it is. Like, it's just a
Mm-hmm.
label for information. We just take that and we start to apply our own definitions to it. But for me, when something, it becomes difficult for me, that's another label. And I just think, like, oh, I haven't mastered this yet. Like, so here I am. Let's go. Like, so my interpretation of the situation is different. So I don't experience all this stress and anxiety and, self criticism and all that. That stuff doesn't happen in my mind because I don't interpret the situation the same.
Oh, that's so deep. I love that because, yeah, we can be our own worst critics. So we self sabotage, we start to blame ourselves. And I absolutely love your analogy, about the music. And it's kind of interesting because what popped into my mind as well is it's the space between the notes, the silence that actually creates the whole music. It's kind of almost like that becomes the coherence, right? It's like the coherence between the mind and the heart, and that flow state, that wake, that, behind the boat, right, that can sort of propel us forward, is that there's that ease when we can start to let go of the uncomfortable feeling and we can push past it to allow what is good, and what we fear sometimes, right? It's pushing past the comfort zone because people inherently do not love uncertainty. It's unfamiliar. We love to gravitate towards what feels comfortable and what is familiar, but the magic magic happens way outside of the comfort zone, right? And I think that we owe it to ourselves to be able to thrive and know that you will get through any situation in life, as traumatic as they might be, as uncomfortable as they might be. There is a way to move past it in a way that can serve you down the road, even though it doesn't feel good in the moment. That's for sure. We've all had those moments, and they can feel awful. But when you know that, well, wait a second, I can choose a different way to respond to what's happening, because it's our thoughts that really kind of, compile and, that just, again, it's that subconscious mind, all those patterns and that constant loop in our mind that creates the reality. So stretching beyond the reality that I think is really key. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on language patterning as well, because you talked about how, of course, it's those thoughts that we have, and we can change and have that deliberate creation, and becoming aware of the observer of our thoughts. But I think that also our language patterning is very indicative of what is going on in the programming of the mind. And if we can start to, pay attention to our language. It's interesting because I was thinking about, as you were talking, a gentleman that I had on my show. And he watched the show. I mean, he did a great job. It was a great interview, a fun interview. And then he said to me, "Oh my goodness." He goes, "I watched the show." And I said, I can't remember what word he said, but he said it all the time. We all kind of have that go-to word. And what he said was, "My wife says this all the time, and I hate it when she does it. And I couldn't believe that I did it too." Right. And so he was actually unaware that he had that pattern, and it was represented in his language.
Well, words have, we've kind of touched on this. Words have, they're labels for feelings. Feelings are beyond linguistics. So we try to fit them into linguistics. And that's why I just said struggle has a connotation to it. What if I say the word, are you struggling? There is a feeling that goes with that. Like, if I say, did you just make a mistake? What is actually, that is a word, but that word has feeling behind it. So the way that we communicate, and if you look at that, what actually is a mistake? A mistake is data. That's all it is. It's data that is showing us what doesn't work or what doesn't work as well as it could work. But when we hear the word, it is infused with feeling. So to me, this is why we have to pay attention to the words we speak, because we are creating the feelings that are, when, as I said in the beginning of the show, I said, feelings are the language of the subconscious. So that's what it's watching. It's not really listening to the words, because the words don't have an absolute meaning. One person can say a mistake and they go, it's just data to them. They don't think of it as something bad. Another person is like, I don't want to make mistakes. So to that person, there's a completely different feeling behind it. So the meanings to the words is not an absolute. So the subconscious, everybody's individual subconscious, is watching the feeling that the words are eliciting. So that patterning, to me, is what you really need to get a handle on, because you need to become aware of, what words am I using, and what is my interpretation of that word? What is the feeling that I am programming? Because that is what the subconscious mind is going to use for its programming when it's listening.
Yeah, really interesting. I'm thinking of a small example, for me, for deliberate thinking and deliberate writing, to use your title of your book. Interesting. So it's just a thought, emotional freedom through deliberate thinking. I remember, composing some emails, and I noticed that one of my first go-to responses for quite some time was always, "No problem, no problem, no problem." And then I just thought, well, who said it's a problem? There was never a problem. So I started to change that, and instead of writing or saying, no problem, I'll say it's all good, because again, that creates a different feeling for me, right?
Right.
And so it's like those little things. If we can start to change and tweak the little things, it really adds to monumental change in our lives.
Well, and we're always coming back to, are you the observer of your thoughts? Or are you in the thoughts? So to make that to be able to look at that, and see that, you have to be outside of it. That's when you have to be anchored in the observer to notice, I notice I say this word and I know what that feeling is that that word elicits in me. So I think I'll reprogram that and I'll change it. But that's why the thought awareness training is just so important, because it weaves its fingers into so many areas of your life. And and like I said, what is the bottom line on all of this? It's personal freedom. You are
Mm.
either free or you are relinquishing your freedom to the environment around you. Like you're only as happy as what people are saying to you that day or what is happening to you. That's the extent of your ability to be happy. And
Hmm.
that's not what we want. That's not freedom.
Yeah, we've given our power away in that case for sure. We want to take our power back and live a life that we absolutely love and focus on those thoughts and create deliberate thinking. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Tom, I'd love to chat with you for longer because I absolutely love this conversation. You're a wealth of knowledge. I acknowledge you for the incredible work that you are doing. And if you can let the listeners know how they can, learn more information about you and where to find your books.
The books are pretty much, because this latest one, because it's just come out, it will take a while for it to migrate into niche stores, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, all the big places, it's already there. And in terms of getting in touch with me or finding out more about me, they can go to my website, which is just tomsterner.com.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, my absolute pleasure having you here, and thank you for helping us to start to recognize our thoughts and the importance of collective thoughts, and also helping to create that coherence between the mind and the heart, because I think a lot of people are missing that key element.
Well, I loved it. I really appreciate you having me on. This has been fun. It's been great. Thank you so much.
All right, lovely listeners. Make sure you tune in next Thursday at 3 p.m. for more ways to cultivate your best life by helping to strengthen and condition your mindset. Stay tuned. More coming up here on Sauga 960.